Hi, my name is Mehran Maghoumi, and I'll be presenting our paper titled DeepNAG, Deep Non-Adversarial Gesture Generation. This work was done as a part of my PhD dissertation. For our reference implementation and additional resources, please visit deepnag.com. Here's an overview of my talk today. I'm going to talk about the motivation for this work and briefly discuss generative adversarial networks. Next, I'll introduce our proposed models for generating synthetic gesture sequences. Then I'll discuss our evaluations and finally conclude with a summary of this work and the future outlook. Gestures are as popular as ever. They provide a novel interaction technique and allow for a fluid and mostly reliable interaction with different applications. However, automatic gesture recognition is still a difficult problem. Particularly, many machine learning models require a lot of data. In this work, we intend to explore the problem of generating synthetic gestures via recurrent neural networks to address data shortage, with the goal of improving the gesture recognition accuracy. Formally, our goal is defined as follows. Given a dataset of gestures D, we intend to train a recurrent generator G, which takes as input a vector of random noise along with a class label and outputs a synthetic gesture. Even though the synthetic gesture is not a part of D, it follows the distribution of D. Generative adversarial networks are a powerful paradigm for synthetic data generation. These models consist of a generator as well as a discriminator. The goal of the generator is to convert vectors of random noise to plausible data, whereas the goal of the discriminator is to determine whether a given data point is real or fake. These two networks are trained jointly, and the goal of the generator is to fool the discriminator. The difficulty of training is a major problem with this classic definition. More recently, the Wasserstein GANs were introduced to mitigate these problems. In these models, the generator aims to estimate the distribution of the dataset directly, whereas the discriminator aims to measure the difference between the distribution of the real dataset and the generated dataset. Using this definition, we built DeepGAN, our adversarial generator, which consists of the generator and discriminator networks, the architecture of which is depicted here. This model, if trained to convergence, will produce plausible results, as shown in this picture. As mentioned previously, GANs are complicated to work with, primarily because there are two networks to train, and the entire training process is slow. Thus, we seek to simplify this training procedure, and we ask ourselves a fundamental question. Is it possible to completely remove the discriminator network, as its sole purpose is to compute the loss for the generator? In order to do this, we need to modify G's training objective. This led to the design of DeepNAG, which is the standalone training of DeepGAN's generator. We propose to define a training objective function that aims to increase the similarity between the fake and real samples while maintaining the variation of the fake samples. There are two fundamental questions that we need to answer. First, how do we compare two sets of point data? And second, how do we compute the gesture similarity? A well-studied function for point set similarity is the Hausdorff distance. Conveniently, the average Hausdorff distance, which is defined as follows, is differentiable and suitable for gradient-based optimization. The next question that we need to answer is how to increase the similarity of gestures. The easy answer to that is by decreasing their dissimilarity. Conveniently, a well-studied dissimilarity measure exists in the literature of gesture recognition, the dynamic time warping algorithm, or DTW for short. Given two time series, DTW computes the dissimilarity scores between the two. More recently, a differentiable formulation of this algorithm called soft DTW was introduced. Using what we discussed, we propose the following loss function to train our generator without the need for a discriminator network. Our loss function consists of two terms, a similarity term and a variation term. Given one fake sample x'1 and one real sample x1, the similarity term aims to reduce the dissimilarity between the two samples. On the other hand, the variation term tries to control the variation of the samples to make sure that the generated samples are as diverse as possible. In fact, if we train this model to convergence, we see plausible generation results. We devised a set of experiments to evaluate our proposed methods. Our quantitative evaluations consist of investigating the increase in the recognition performance when a dataset of gestures is augmented by our generated samples. For this evaluation, we experimented with 5 different gesture recognizers trained on 6 different gesture datasets. Our baseline results were obtained by training each of these recognizers on a small portion of each of these datasets. Next, we generated a set of synthetic gestures using the following 4 generators and repeated our experiments, only this time with a training set consisting of a mix of real as well as synthetic samples. The following figure depicts the results of our experiments on the JK 2017 dataset. We see that in a majority of cases, using some form of data augmentation decreases the recognition error, sometimes by a large margin. In fact, with the help of DeepNAG, we were able to achieve the perfect recognition accuracy in a few cases. We see a similar trend for the UT Connect as well as the MSR Action 3D datasets. In some cases, however, we see that the use of data augmentation hurts the performance. Specifically in the SPU Connect interaction dataset, we see that the majority of cases, the use of data augmentation actually hurts the performance. One possible explanation could be that this particular dataset consists of multiple actors collaborating on performing gestures together. For a better comparison of the results, we devised a scoring scheme by counting the number of times the use of each generator led to reduced recognition error compared to the baseline. On the left, we see the scores aggregated across different datasets. We observe that regardless of the recognizer, DeepNAG has achieved the highest score. On the right, we see the scores aggregated across different recognizers. We observe a similar trend. Regardless of the dataset, DeepNAG has achieved the highest score. These results suggest that DeepNAG is a viable option for increasing the recognition performance via data augmentation. We now discuss our qualitative evaluations, which consist of conducting a user study to evaluate the realism of the synthetic samples using human evaluators. This type of evaluation is common in the GAN literature and is done on platforms such as Amazon Mechanical Turk. For our user study, we used the recently introduced Hype Infinite benchmark, a standard benchmark for conducting user studies with GAN. For each experiment, this benchmark consists of recruiting 30 human participants. Each participant is shown a total of 100 data samples, half of which are synthetic. The samples are presented in random order to the participant. The participants are then asked to determine whether a given sample is fake or real. Once the study concludes, we compute the percentage of the samples that were judged incorrectly, and that gives us the Hype Infinite score for that study. We conducted our study on the following 3 datasets, which represent a diverse set of gestures from a variety of input devices. Our gesture generators were DeepGAN and DeepNAG, and our study was conducted on the Amazon Mechanical Turk platform. In total, we recruited 180 unique participants. We defined an additional set of criteria in order to ensure a high-quality pool of participants for our study. Participants began our study by reading its purpose and giving consent, and also answering a few demographic questions. Afterwards, the participants were shown the interface on the right, which displays a gesture animation and asks the user to indicate whether they think the gesture they saw was performed by a human or it was computer generated. Upon clicking the Submit button, the correct answer is displayed to the participant. This slide shows the demographics of our participants. This table summarizes our user study results. We see that across all experiments, DeepNAG has outperformed DeepGAN with statistical significance. In fact, on the Leap Motion dataset, DeepNAG achieved hyperrealism, which is defined as a Hype Infinite score of more than 50. These results correlate well with the results of our quantitative evaluations. In summary, DeepNAG outperformed DeepGAN in most cases in our evaluations. It demonstrated better data augmentation performance, and its samples appeared more realistic to human judges. Lastly, it was up to 17 times faster to train. Some directions for future work are as follows. We intend to investigate the use of our models in domains besides gesture generation. We also plan to investigate the generation of multi-actor gestures. Recall that in our quantitative evaluations, we observed a decrease in the recognition performance on a dataset which contained multi-actor gestures. Lastly, we intend to investigate other generative frameworks, such as variational autoencoders. Note that the appendix chapter of our paper briefly touches on this subject. However, we intend to research this topic more closely. Thank you for your participation in this talk, and don't forget to visit our website.